hang on. All right, go ahead.
All right. Well, welcome to Empowered Learning 101. So excited to be with you this evening. Hopefully there's no vice presidential election going on, and we have lots of Facebook participants follow along. But welcome to this session. We're going to talk about tried and true homeschool secrets, how less is really more. And on this session, we're going to focus on being mindful about those emotions and how they affect that learning. We've kind of dove into that a little bit more. I kind of drive home the whole family life and trying to make sure, I want this to be an experience that decades from now, you have a wonderful relationship within your family, as well as a good education. We're also going to talk about brain health and why breaks are really needed for better learning. And then the last thing we're going to talk about is specialized learning and how that's very different from the standardized education or learning that we've had in the past. But first of all, I'd like to thank Idaho Freedom Foundation or Idaho Freedom Action for sponsoring these classes. I really appreciate them seeing the value in teaching these courses on better home learning and self-directed learning, in particular, how to create that for your home and your family. And I appreciate them and them taking that time to do that. Just to quickly introduce myself, my name is Rebecca Bowman. I've been married for 26 years. I am the host of the Luminous Mind podcast. I've been doing online homeschooling for about 16 years. My oldest son, I actually started in kindergarten on accident, but we've enjoyed it ever since. And it's really taught me to become a learning enthusiast. And that's what I hope to pass on to you, that you create, it becomes like this amazing part of your lifestyle. We're going to start with some group introductions. I always do this because I like to get to know whoever is watching, just so we can make this class fit for you. Like I said, these are free classes. There's no spamminess. There's no selling. It's just to help you have a better experience with the family learning. Why don't we go ahead first off and start off with Dustin, though? Do you want to introduce yourself? He's moderating the chat, and he's helping to be the representative here from the Idaho Freedom Action.
Sure thing. So my name is, as she said, Dustin Hurst. I'm the vice president here at the Idaho Freedom Foundation and Idaho Freedom Action. But more important, I am a dad to 3 kids who are, for the first time this year, homeschooled. And I'm nervous about that because, it's our first time doing that, and it's, we're stepping out of the status quo, and we just want to make sure that we develop self-directed learners who are confident and curious and persistent and gritty, if you will, to use Angela Duckworth's term. So we're happy to have Rebecca and sharing her, sharing her expertise with us, and it's going to be a great class. We've had three classes so far. This is class number 4, and the 3 prior ones have been amazing. And I think you can find those on Rebecca's website. So if you've missed those, check them out.
Yes. All right. Well, yeah, I'll talk about that now. Last week we talked about time management, and Dustin and I at the very end kind of went off on a little thing on all our own about, some tricks and tips, because both of us really struggle with that. Still something to this day that I think every year, it's a struggle again to be better at that time management. We talked about changing those expectations, maybe especially with family, with learning at home. We have to put our priorities or our focus in other areas, and then maybe what those expectations can look like. Living with learning in all aspects of life, how to manage that multifaceted life of home and education and all of that. And then we talked a lot about how good teaching those life skills are to our kids for better home management. And it helps them with all those adulting skills that we hear all those college students are struggling with. It tends to be not something that homeschoolers struggle with. They learn to do those things very naturally and learn how to take care of themselves naturally. You can find those recordings on the website, like Dustin said, theluminouspine.net. I also put them on our Empowered Education 101 Facebook page. If you want to search for that, we're going to be putting all that content there. I always like to do a resource page. And so every time I post the content, and you can find those on YouTube, on my YouTube channel as well, but every time I post the content, I always put the resource page like in the comments, just so you can go and get more information about these topics that we're talking about. I always feel like, being an empowered parent is probably the most important thing we can do. And we do that by educating ourselves first. So the first, for this resource page, we talked a little bit about gentle parenting. It's definitely a thing that I think some people, we need to kind of go back and learn techniques for parenting. I think being an authoritarian parent, if it gets very taxing. If we feel like we have to manage and control our children's lives all the time, it gets to be too much. And we want to kind of move into a relationship with them where they're learning how to manage their own lives, and we are more like a consultant in a way, and that we work with them and we work through struggles together, type of thing. Reinforcing those positive emotional habits, and we're going to talk about that today. This is a great website about how kids need brain breaks. Super important for the learning, and it's something that really scares me when I watch what's happening in the traditional education, where they're taking away, art or recess, or elongating all their homework at night. Kids need brain breaks to be able to learn, and we're going to talk a lot about that. This is a really great website that was recommended to me, actually, a YouTube channel by Sir Ken Robbins, and he talks about, the title is Do Schools Kill Creativity? Do schools kill creativity? And it's actually really good. The whole time we were listening, I was telling Dustin that my youngest son, has decided he wanted to go to a charter school, and the whole time he was listening to this, he was yelling, "Yes, this is right." He's seeing that in his life now. So I guess sometimes we have to go through experiences like that. We're going to talk about education standardization and how, if it's essential or it's harmful, and maybe some of those topics, as well as 10 steps to create your own customized learning with unit studies. We've talked a lot in the past about those practical skills, being able to make that the schooling applicable to the children's lives, helps drive a lot of interest in the stuff that they're learning. We're also going to talk about the role of those emotions in learning, and then HALT for better mental health, because sometimes when we're schooling at home, we struggle with our own, mental health, of how to deal with all of this. Like we said, we're going to talk about those tried and true homeschool secrets, how less is more. The first thing, though, I'd like to kind of go back and really think about, one of the first classes we talked about, I'm just driving home that why you're doing this and what you're trying to work towards. I really want to understand what is working for your family and how to make this, like how to find your own groove in this family learning lifestyle. I'd love to hear, and maybe if anyone wants to put in the chat, what's been working for your family, how your student is finding their groove, or how they found their groove. I know too, every year is different. So maybe this year, they're still struggling, and you're still trying to figure out that groove for your children. And then also, how have you seen yourself and your students' ideas on education evolve or move through this experience? Because sometimes we have to experience it a little while to really see our thinking start to change. And in one of the other sessions, we talked about the importance of deschooling and how that's really important for students who have been in the public school environment, but it's even more so important for you as a parent, because if we can deschool ourselves, have some different ideas about how this works, we are going to enjoy it a lot better, and we won't have that fear, like Dustin was saying, like, am I doing this okay, and is this going to work out for us, in a good way. So some ideas to figure out, how to find your family's groove. And I really want to stress the importance that your groove is going to look much different than maybe your friend's groove that's homeschooling, and that's the way it's supposed to be. Homeschooling is actually supposed to work for your family, not against it. And so, I would really encourage you to talk over these things quite often with your children, in particularly with your spouse, everybody who's involved in this family education experience. Talk about what's been working, and then areas where you're struggling. I think that's really important, that we keep those lines of communication open with our children, that we're not talking at them, but we're actually getting their input into things as well. How does the struggle, like that, the places where you're struggling, fit in with your why? Sometimes we find ourselves like we have this idea of how we're supposed to be doing it, but it's really not part of our why. Do you know what I mean? Like, many times we want to fit the part, and maybe it's time to kind of reshuffle some things, or maybe get rid of some things. Maybe there's some things that are just causing too much frustration at this point in the process, and that you need to trim it back. And that's okay. It's okay to trim things back and make it work for your family. And make sure you're following your own schedule as much as possible. Some families work great early in the morning, and then they get on to other things later in the day. Some people would rather, get their housework or those kinds of things out of the way, and then work later in the afternoon. But the cool thing is that you do have time to do a lot of different things, but make the schedule work for you as much as possible. Okay, to kind of get on to the topic a little bit more, those homeschooling secrets. This really is not a secret. Well, maybe it is. If you haven't been doing schooling very long, maybe you think that schooling has to happen from 8 to 3 every day. But first and foremost, you need to remember that less is more in your homeschool, and your family culture will be better the more we keep that less is more feeling going. I remember the first time I was doing this schooling with my oldest son, he would finish at like 10 or 11 o'clock during the day, because he loved to be outside doing whatever he could do. And I was panicked, like thinking, okay, he's gotten done all of the things that we required him to do, and he would be off playing, and I would feel guilty, like, am I not doing enough? Is he not getting enough? But really, what I found out later is that was the perfect amount for him. There was no friction between us, because he was getting that kind of stuff done. And he ended up, whenever they tested him or whatever, he was off the charts in everything that he was doing. And so I really do think that sometimes we do that, just crazy amount of, and we'll talk more about that, but just driving to try to cram in as much as we possibly can. But it really doesn't help our children at all. I love this. This is part of a website that was listed on some of those resources. But did you know that it takes 400 repetitions for something for a child to create that learning it, for him to get it, unless there's an easy button, and there really is in homeschooling. And that easy button is always done more through play. I think that's so much easier to do at the home, more so sometimes than in the school. In particular, but if they can do it through play, it only takes them 10 or 12 times. My second boy, he was a super active child, and one of the things that he would do is as he's doing his ABCs, he'd be jumping off a chair, he'd be doing that kind of stuff, and that movement and the fact it felt more like play to him was so helpful. There were so many things that he learned while I would be reading or whatever, and he'd be playing with his cars under the table. It really, it is very true that kids learn better through activity and play. So kind of to go back to that, the one of the some of those other secrets too is being mindful again of those emotions and how it affects your learning as well as your family life. Really, that is my goal. I want everybody to love their families at the end of this whole process. And some parents find themselves being so legalistic with it and being so authoritarian that their children will never homeschool for one, and then also they don't enjoy it. They find it it just creates such more bad feelings. And some parents are really worried about this. If you've ever done homework with your kids, I saw a great meme and I was going to include it with some of the things we're talking about, but we think that that's what it should be like, and that is not what it should be like. In fact, many times, if you look at what's written here, faced with frustration, despair, worry, sadness, shaming, all of that, the kid loses access to their memory and their reasoning and their capacity to make those connections. And so the more friction there is in the home, we're actually doing more harm for our kids to learn than not. Scared kids perform poorly and they don't learn new information very well. Learning can cause a lot of anxiety to a kid when it's pushed and shoved and thrown on them, and it acts as a enemy to their memory, and then they just feel stupid all the time. And sadly, some of our classrooms look like that. We see kids whose intellectual energies and capacities are drained by those negative emotional states. And really, emotions are that on and off switch for learning. And we can do a lot by keeping those emotions positive. I'm not going to say that learning is always easy and that there's never any struggle and there's never any of that, but it's almost better to pull them away and talk about like, well, okay, I'm seeing that you're angry. tell me what's going on. Maybe you as a parent are angry. Maybe you are frustrated with whatever they're doing. I notice sometimes when I would watch my kids do math, I'd like, this is taking so long, it doesn't have to take this long. It was, I don't know how many times, my 100th time doing the problem, but for them, it was something new and it should take some time. And sometimes you may need to pull yourself away as well. But just remember that emotional brain, that limbic system, and I'm having a heck of a time pronouncing things tonight, but it has the power to open or close the access to learning and memory and the ability to make those novel connections. So some great ways to enforce some positive emotional habits is to prompt motivation. Sometimes motivation just comes from confidence. And maybe, if we're catching that they're a little frustrated, helping them break down new challenges into smaller, manageable components. And sometimes we have to praise the smallest little things, praising those competencies. Whenever our kids are when we've seen them do something new, no matter how slight or little it is, here's my son here, learning how to spell for the first time. It's really important to praise them. Taking pictures was super important to my kids when they were little, because it was, something that they could, a sense of that they felt that accomplishment from me. We want to spark that curiosity as much as possible. I often hear this from parents, like they just can't get their kids excited about learning. And sometimes it takes some time to figure out how to spark that curiosity, how to make that thrive. But the more opportunities that we give them, and the more they have the ability to come up with new ideas, they can enjoy that messiness of questions that come to them, really help spark that curiosity. We also want to nourish intellect, talent, and power. You want to find out what your kid does well, and then make sure that and I know this is hard, especially, I've been here before of finding the time or the budget or even the psychological energy to help them enjoy those activities. Sometimes if they find something that they love, like my daughter is really loving jujitsu right now, that really gets them more excited about school too, because then there's this excitement energy that's kind of flowing through everything. You want to encourage a connection as much as possible. One of the tragedies of how our modern system is that everything is somewhat disconnected. But in life, nothing is disconnected. But while we're trying to learn it, sometimes that is like a struggle of like seeing where this is going to fit in my life. And especially kids, especially, they don't see that connection. And that's really important for them to feel excited about their learning. Nobody wants to feel like they're just learning something just because. They want to feel like there's going to be some kind of application in their life. And I think last time we really talked about, maybe it was the second one. Can you remember, Dustin? We talked about that, the learning, and I forgot the term of it, but where there is actually experiential learning.
You might call it like iterative learning, where you learn as
Yeah.
you build on. I mean, you
Yeah.
learn, you fail, you learn, you fail, and
Yeah.
it just builds. Iterative learning
Yeah,
might be a good
and
term
it
for
does
that.
spiral, definitely. And I'm glad you brought up failure, because sometimes when we think about those positive emotions, we think that failure is never really part of that. And that's really one thing I think that we have to help. And number 5, that monitoring growth sometimes does that, because we're still not doing, or your children still aren't doing it as perfect as they want to do it, or and sometimes it's good to pull things out. If you make a portfolio for your kids, I find that super helpful. Keeping journals, having them keep journals either in Word or in pictures is super important, so that they can see their growth. And you want to do the same thing for yourself. Be a model for them on how we monitor that growth. I don't know how many people have felt disappointed in themselves, but sometimes if we can monitor that, it helps create that excitement. It reinforces that.
Can I add in one thing,
Sure.
just to add into your talk about failure? I think I think my biggest beef with public schools right now. I mean, there are plenty of them to have, but my biggest beef is that sometimes public schools, you're completely afraid to fail, because you bomb one test and then you have to do the entire course over again. And that doesn't mirror real life. For example, I do marketing for a living, and over the last week I've been doing tests on AB and ABC tests on Facebook ads. Well, I set up one Facebook ad and I said I think this is going to work, and I set a budget, and it was a terrible ad. Like, the conversion rate was just terrible. I'm not going to lose my job because I didn't do a good job on that ad. I think being able to let your kids fail and teach them that that's real life, is that, especially like in marketing, but the scientific method.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, WD-40, we know, came after 40 different tries at something else, actually, a different formulation that
Yeah.
they were seeking. We need to model real life as much as possible, and sometimes you don't get that in public schools. So we got to teach our kids. Obviously, we don't want to teach them to promote failure or to be failures, whatever that means. But we want for them to accept that failure is a part of life, and it's not an end all be all if they fail at something.
Well, and I really think, you said you don't want to teach failure. You really, the only way you teach failure is by not allowing it to happen. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, failure comes because, or you start to feel like a failure because of, like you said, when we're expected to perform perfectly the first time around, and after so many times of failing at being perfect the first time around, we become very, we just feel like
Anxious.
we can't, yeah, we can't
Anxious.
do it. And that's one of the awesome things, like we said about this style of learning, you can work it where your kids are just gradually growing on their own strengths. I mean, of course, my son writes better than this now, and he's learned how to write cursive, and he does. But it was really important to applaud that at the time, and he didn't feel like a failure there. When he looks at this now, he's somewhat embarrassed, but that's really important for them to constantly. I think it's just teaching them to continue to try and testing. We're going to talk a lot about the difference between the standardized education and the specialized education. Testing can be super damaging to a child's self-esteem as well, and they'll feel like failing or giving up after that point. We're going to move into brain breaks and how that's so essential to learning. Like at the beginning of this course, we talked about how less is really more. And that really is true. I find it interesting that Finland, for example, if you look at the way that they're choosing to do their schooling, they're pushing back learning to read or learning to do school, in this formal setting further and further back. I think they started at 7, that they're waiting till 7 to teach their kids how to read. And I actually heard they're going to push it back even further because they find that kids actually do better. There's so many kids that just aren't ready to learn. And that was one of the really awesome things, especially if you're not tied to a public school that's expecting, some type of monitoring or growth, like we were talking about before we even start recording, is that when you see brain fatigue, when you see your kids struggling with something, you can always have them take a break. And when I was teaching my kids to read, I always taught them before we would start some kind of formal schooling. But it was cool because I could just go until they were just tired. And most of the time that it kept them excited to keep learning because we didn't push it too far. We kept that excitement long enough. And then once the excitement was over and I could tell they were fatigued, we stopped. And, but that kept them always wanting to learn. I think maintaining attention in formal environments is really quite difficult for young kids. There's been lots of studies that found that children were less attentive as the lesson increased from 10 to 30 minutes. And if you think about yourself, I think we talked about this somewhat in that the time management, how those 20-minute blocks are a perfect time to stay focused on something. And then sometimes it's better if we kind of move on or go to a different activity for 20 minutes and then we come back. And that's really important with our children. I think, doing an assignment or something and then getting out and getting some exercise for a while is really important. And I think kids too, like when they know that they're going to have a break, they'll gladly come back and continue to learn. I mean, they want to sit down after a certain amount of time too. So, and really that is one of the best held secrets of homeschooling success, that there's really a lack of that kill and drill. You have that ability to stop and not to just push it until the children are just sick of it. Healthy brains need breaks to process the information. Your brain has to spend some time filing stuff away. And I don't know if you've ever noticed this, Dustin, but whenever you're trying to learn something and you just pound it and you're just pounding it and pounding it, and you just can't take it anymore. And you're like, I can't learn this. And I've seen my kids with languages do this quite a bit. I can't do this anymore. And then they come back like the next day or whatever, and all of a sudden that information clicks. And really it comes from, we can gain so much in so little time. I think that's really important to think about how less is really more in a lot of ways, and not to kill and drill. A homeschooling day is obviously it's shorter than that traditional school day, and it provides them time for more passion-driven learning and movement. I think that was one of the unexpected benefits that I saw of schooling my kids at home. Is, like I said, my son would finish at 10 or 11 o'clock, and then he would, as they're little, they're going out and they're just playing. But as he got older, he would spend his time writing pieces on the piano, or I caught him one time. He was really into medicine, my oldest son, and he was doing all this fake, I don't know what the word is, this gross fake like wounds and stuff. But he was learning how to, take care of different wounds. And that's one of the really cool things. My second boy wrote a book in his spare time. And, I think that it gives them so much time to do that passion-driven learning, and they get a lot more movement, which is healthier for our brains to work as well. Brain breaks drive a lot of creativity. These are some of the other studies that they found, and it creates a lifelong love of learners when we don't kill and drill. That traditional school often overtaxes and overprivileges that that task-oriented productivity, but it really does kill a lot of creativity when we don't have breaks and we don't have time to do things that we love. Also, daydreaming is something that we shouldn't scold, but we should encourage. We should use it once we recognize the sign of boredom that maybe they're not into this right now and we can come back to it later. Um, that's really important. You'll see kids that, I mean, I've seen them in different things that, like this last week, my son had time off, and we were up at my in-laws cabin and we were watching all these really fascinating shows on the Russian Revolution. And he was like, I would love this stuff. This is so neat. And I could see him just really diving into that. So, I mean, I could see he's definitely not bored with that. But daydreaming isn't a bad sign. And a lot of times as parents, we want to scold kids. As teachers, we want to scold kids for not paying attention. But really, it's a sign that they're no longer engaged, and it's best to just stop what we're doing. Daydream, I don't think boredom is necessarily a bad thing for kids anyway. I grew up in the 80s, 90s. I was often bored. And by being bored, hopefully found good, constructive, creative ways to cure that boredom. But I've seen that with my kids too. Like I said, they find things to occupy their time that's good and healthy. And studies show that those breaks facilitate that creative insight and problem solving that kids need. Do you have anything to add, Dustin? I saw you like putting your hands up.
Oh, it's just so funny because I was often the bored kid in class, and I don't know. I just think it's interesting because I think there are times, and maybe just tell me your take on this. There are times where if you're bored, you need to like take a break. You need to go for a walk. You need to do some push-ups. You need to do. But I'm curious, is there ever time like if you're bored that you just need to power through it? Like, is that a thing?
Well, especially as you become an adult, I mean, we see how we power through things, and I have
church,
and I have encouraged that with my kids before. I'm trying to get away from that. Like, well, sometimes you got to do things that you hate, because no, I don't want my kids to have to do things that they hate. I'm trying to get my husband and I, out of that, of doing things that we hate, because. But at the same time, there is a lot of value in and kids, if they're really interested in something, they will handle the boring part of it to be able to learn how to do all of it. Does that make sense?
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
Kids will power through that. And teaching grit, like you mentioned, like Angela Duckworth talks a lot about that, teaching the grit is super important. So yeah, I don't think that it's necessarily a daydreaming, you got to power through that boredom is a bad thing. But we also want to be mindful of that too. We don't want to push that boredom to the point where we just suck all the life out of everything. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
No, I get you.
I think that you got to have a really good balance in there of that. Because I'm not going to say, when I was teaching my children how to read, for example, I would go, okay, let's just get to the end of this section. So yeah, we would push through to the end of that section, but then we would stop. Does that make sense? Like I didn't just stop right in the middle of it. I just, we finished it. And that's really, my, when I talk with my kids about whatever they start, I'm like, if you really want to do this is something you got to see to the end. And I do push that a lot. Like, you can't, just because you get bored with it halfway through doesn't mean that you need to stop. Sometimes we have to make it to the end. My son, when he was writing his book, that last, trying to get it through the editor, he hates the whole rewriting and writing. And I'm hoping he gets to a point where he can handle the boredom of that to finish the quality of book that he wants. But
right.
Those are things we have to teach them how to finish. So
yeah, no, that makes sense. And there are times, again, what I think this comes down to is homeschooling and even distance learning and just teaching our kids through parenting to be self-directed learners. We should model real life as much as possible. And there, again, here at work, sometimes there are things I don't want to do that are boring as heck, but because I want to keep my job, because I want to be able to do really cool stuff. I like for example, like I edit audio for a podcast that we're producing. I don't love editing audio. Sometimes it's boring, and sometimes in graphic design, sometimes it's really cool because I get to do cool stuff. But sometimes it's like, oh my gosh, this is the worst. So I think being able to power through at the right times, but
Mhm.
still giving yourself breaks and being empathetic and recognizing too when you're actually just procrastinating because out of fear because you're not
Mhm.
perfect.
That's true. Yep,
um, just being
that's true.
aware and present, but also doing those hard things that are just necessary as part of life.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And I think one of the ways that we can model that to our kids a lot is to talk about that. Oh my gosh, I had to do this really boring thing, and I didn't want it, but I had to, I really wanted to get to the end part. And so I had to learn that. I think talking that through with your kids helps them recognize, oh, wow, mom and dad have to do that too. I was doing that, I have several deadlines I have to get done for work or for my podcast or whatever. And talking to my son about that, oh, I've got to sit down and get this stuff done because this has to get even though I'd rather be, I don't know, binge watching Netflix or something like that. But he's like getting it, like, oh, you have deadlines, you have things you have to do too. And I think that's really important that's why that communication, I think, is key. I love this little meme down here because I think it's so true. It's really small. But homeschooling isn't hard because it's school. Homeschool is hard because it's parenting, and homeschooling is really an extension of parenting. And I think I've said this before, and I'm gonna say it again. But I think that we have lost our ability to parent. Our schools have done so much for us in the past that we have no idea how to parent anymore. And when we have to have our children longer than just the evening or something, it creates anxiety sometimes for parents. And um, I really, that's why we are doing these classes. It's just as important that we get back to that, to having good communication with our kids and with our families, so we can regain that parenting. I don't want my generation of kids not to know how to parent. And I really think we need to get back to that for sure. And then this meme here by Kelly Halderson. Don't try to teach your kids what to think or even how to think. Their kids are born to be thinkers. We all are. What I try to do is stay out of their way and allow them to think. I do that by listening more than talking, answering questions when asked. Surrounding them with interesting things and practicing and interesting things and people and places. I'm having a heck of a time reading, and giving feedback when it's requested. And I think that's really important too, especially when they're learning how to do something. With my second boy in his book, I'm not very good in English at all. And he would write something and I would just like, that was awesome. And he got to a point when he got older, he really did want some critique on it. But I think that the fact I didn't what's the word, like over
Analyze maybe, or
analyze stuff when he
yeah.
was really little, it helped keep that love going until he got to the point that he was requesting feedback. And we all get there eventually, right? We want to be the best that we can be. So we're going to talk about specialized education versus standardized education. And when I was looking this up, after I had already decided I was going to talk about those specialized education, it's not special ed, although why not? Why can't everybody have a special education just for them? Standardized learning, it goes back, I don't know, federal department of, the federal department, once they got involved, they wanted to standardize it. And we've only seen it get worse. And with each standardization, no child left behind also meant no child moves ahead.
Yeah.
Also, with the Common Core, it's all becoming very standardized. It's standardized education works great for curriculum companies because they sell a lot of money. They want to sell it to every school. And it also helps create that equality, so everybody has the same education and they all know the same things. It's also easy for instruction, but it oftentimes just skims the surface of a subject. And I've often heard from different people, that entrepreneurs, different people that in different industries, that we don't have specialized people anymore. We don't have anybody with real skills. Yeah, we all have a standardized education, but we don't have, people that are very skilled at all. And a lot of times that standardized education leaves children very lost. By the time they're done with 18 years, at their 18th year, 16 years of school, 15 years, however long that they go to school, a lot of people are still wondering who they are and what they love, and they don't even know themselves at all. They have spent so much time being um, learning all the same stuff that they've never really learned about who they are and what they like. So that standardized education or that custom education really helps to keep kids engaged. It keeps their minds illuminated. And on the Luminous Mind podcast, I love that word because that's really how all I can use to describe, like, when you have caught fire with that excitement of learning, your brain feels lit up. You feel somewhat enlightened, I guess. Customized education gives us skills because it allows you to dive really deep. Like I said, my first son was really involved in medical stuff. He got on, was taking college classes in a nat and phys and stuff at 14 and I'm like, what are you doing? You have English to do. What a stupid mother am I, right? I mean, I should have been like, oh my gosh, let's dive into this. But unfortunately, if you work within a public system, sometimes you can't. But that's the cool thing about what you're able to do with your kids with homeschooling, is that you can dive deep with them, and they may go deep for a while and be very interested in that subject and then switch. I often see that. Oftentimes parents are worried about if they dive deep with their kids, or if their kids are allowed to do that, they're not going to be able to move through all this progression of what we think everybody needs to learn. But often I've seen it too many times with my own kids that, yeah, for a month they're interested, a few months they're interested in bugs, and then they move on to everybody fills their own gaps and their own holes. It also gives, when we do that customized education, we can give our kids freedom to figure out who they are, and boredom gives us time to be creative. In fact, in those brain breaks, like I said, gives them time to figure out who they are. Sometimes we have to spend some time pondering about that kind of stuff. And so I think sometimes we shouldn't feel bad if our kids aren't constantly busy or constantly learning, because it helps them become the person they need to be, or that they should be. And then they know better who they are when they get out of schooling. If your kids come out of school and they don't know who they are or what they want to be, I would say that education has ultimately failed them, for sure. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about how to create that specialized education for your kids. A lot of homeschooling parents often do unit studies. I don't know if you've heard of that at all, but no. Anyway, but it's really, and this is a great way to kind of motivate kids that they can learn the things that they want to learn, is, let them kind of, like, as you're talking about, like, what do you want to learn this year? What are some things that you really want to, and sometimes we keep English and math standardized, but we move on to other things for some of those other subjects of either history or science or something like that. But let them choose the topic or the theme, what interests your child, and consider your kids' goals of what they want to do. A great thing to do is to search the library. I don't think anybody needs to spend a lot of money on this. It's possible to find all kinds of books or videos or different things like that to help push those goals. So we're kind of going back to keeping those positive emotions going. Sometimes you can choose crafts or different things like that, things that kids can build that really help to specialize or customize that education. Really research different outings. That's the coolest thing about doing this style of education, is that they don't just get one field trip every year. You could do it monthly. You could do field trips every week. You can do, and there's so many people that just love it when you call them up and you're like, hey, I have a group of friends. We're a bunch of homeschooling parents who want to come and see, whatever. It's really fun to go and do those outings, and it helps to helps to kind of spur that specialized education. Also look for mentors. I would love to start a school. I've been thinking about this a lot. I'd love to start learning centers here in Idaho. Don't you think that would be awesome, where you could be part of it? You could join your whole family for like $300 a month or something like that. But it could be a place that you could just go and you could practice different instruments. You could go and you could work on a car, or you could learn mechanics, or you could learn welding, or you could, and your kids could just roam through this place and work with all of these amazing mentors on a plethora of skills. I wish that we could see more of that. There's several of those back east, but not here in Idaho. But it would be great. The more we can connect our kids with mentors helps to specialize that education as well. Consider any types of projects. Project learning is really important to help with that specialized education. List your activities. I'm trying to think what I was meaning there when I put that in there. I guess write down like your goals of what you want to do, and then create a schedule and add it to that homeschooling plan. And might be where, I mean, you might see kids get bored halfway through, and I would encourage them to finish that. You know, if this is your plan, let's finish out this plan and then we'll move on to something else. Oftentimes they'll naturally bound to something else. I've seen that a zillion times too, where my kids are they get their next idea for the next topic that they want to learn. Just, you know, it's just like, what is it, kind of sidelines off of their last topic. Does that make sense, Dustin?
Yeah.
Understand? Anyway. All right. Well, one way also to keep the emotions positive in your home is to take care of yourself. I think that oftentimes, because we have all this learning at our home, we become really engrossed in our children. We really become engrossed in this life that we forget to take care of ourselves. But we really can't help other people if we don't take some time for ourselves. We want to be able to make sure that we're also modeling self-care for our kids. Bring them along if you have to, and model, you know, exercise, model healthy eating, model taking a walk or whatever you need to get, you know, to clear your head and to feel better. And what are you doing also to model your own learning? I think, you know, we're so busy trying to get our children motivated that maybe one of the best things we can do is get ourselves motivated. And then when they see us lighting our own fire, kindling our own fire, then it makes them want to do that for themselves. And what are you doing to model the kind of person that you want your student to be? This is also another thing I think really important about keeping positive emotions in home. And this is actually for like,
Is this
you
for
know,
addicts?
if you struggled with addicts,
goodness.
if you struggle with addicts, if you struggle with depression, which I have problems with that, these are some really helpful things to think about. You need to be very self-aware. And so just to remember this HALT thing, you might be hungry, you know, there might be some kind of emotional need that you need. And so sometimes if we can eat, and sometimes that's helps us feel better. Also, if we're angry,
So
you know,
I
to
keep
be
these in my
angry.
desk because
Okay.
I'm often
Hangry.
hangry.
Yeah, you don't
Big
want to
guys
get
are
hangry.
hangry a lot.
And it's horrible when you have little people underfoot and you find yourself getting hangry because you're working on something with them, and sometimes it's best to go like I gotta stop, I gotta go eat something.
Yeah.
And then anger is a normal, healthy emotion to experience. You know, even though I'm pushing the positivity all the time, the important thing about this HALT, though, is to take time to try to understand what's causing your anger and know how to properly express it. Once again, like, we've lost our ability for good communication and good parenting. And I think a lot of it is just being able to express your anger, or, you know, even to recognize it or understand it.
Well,
Sometimes, yeah.
sorry to interrupt. I think it's so much of psychology, or at least pop psychology, that we see on the internet and memes and stuff like that. It's like you have to be positive all the time. Just think positively. Well, that's not the human experience. I think
It really isn't.
honestly, it's just to be present with your emotions and to understand that that's part of the human condition. And if you buy into the pop psychology that you need to think positively all the time, you're going to end up shaming yourself because you're not being as positive as the guru on the YouTube video that you just watched.
Yes.
So you've got to teach yourself, and then you'll teach your kids to be present with their emotions, to sit with them, and to be okay with them. Now, obviously, with anger especially, you want to make sure that you're venting appropriately and you're not giving into actions that will later harm you or harm others.
Yes.
But to be okay with feeling that's a huge thing that I've struggled with in my house, and I'm trying to teach that to myself and to my kids.
Yeah, and it's really, I mean, the more you can work on it, the earlier, the better. I mean, I found myself, I'm really stressing this a lot because I found myself angry a lot, and children take that like you're angry at them.
Yes,
does that make sense? Like
absolutely.
they don't understand why you're angry. They just feel like it has something to do with them, and then they creates a lot of turmoil in their own life. So I think it's just super important that we understand that. With the whole COVID thing, I was listening to a YouTube thing last night, and the guy was talking about how like 30%, there's like 30% increase in child abuse because there are a lot of angry parents out there. We're going through an awful lot. I mean, we're asking parents to homeschool. We're asking them to work while they're homeschooling. We're asking them to also try to manage their life with a mask on, or limited activity. And if we don't start like getting a handle on those emotions, it can become a horrible thing. I think about that with the kids. Like, what are these kids going to grow up in? So I think it's just super important. The other thing that might be happening is that you might be lonely, and especially when you're homeschooling, you feel like you're in a little tunnel, like you're in your own like little box. And sometimes that's one of the reasons why I really wanted to do these courses, is that there was some kind of group that we could kind of come together and, talk about some of these issues together and kind of curb that loneliness. Because I think that's just as important for parents to, surround ourselves with people, make sure that we're not isolating ourselves or withdrawing, that we have a place that we can express those fears and those doubts, and in a safe place for sure. Also, we need to understand tiredness. I think this is another just huge benefit to homeschooling. Your kids don't have to be forced to wake up at a ridiculous time. If you need to, as a parent, definitely take some time, take a nap. Sometimes I would put a movie on for my kids and I would go, I am so tired today. I've got to lay down for half an hour or something. And, the kids are totally fine with that. They get that if you're tired. And I don't think we rest enough as adults, or we teach that to our kids. We're constantly going, and so really important. So just to remember that HALT, to remember the hunger, anger, loneliness, or tiredness. There's so much that just by checking those things that we can kind of help with those positive emotions in our house. So
I think I want to just commend you for adding in addiction. I wouldn't have made the connection about addiction, but I think that this is one place where homeschooling has a huge leg up on public schooling. For example, let me give you what happened in my house last night. So I got to bed super late because I was doing work. It's a hectic time. So at 3:00 in the morning, my daughter comes into the bed and she's scared. She had a bad dream, right? So she gets in bed. She's still up for an hour because she just can't fall back asleep. And then I will never forget this, at 4:00 in the morning, 4:04 a.m., my son, for whatever reason, he was having a nightmare or something, he just woke up and just started screaming bloody murder. He thought that there were ghosts in his room. And he just I've never heard screams that loud and that's
like a night terror.
Oh my gosh. So he jumped in our bed too. So luckily we have a king size bed, so we could fit all of it. But he was up for another hour too. They all slept in this morning. I got up, I got out to work or whatever, but they all slept. And that's okay because they didn't have to meet the bells. They didn't have to be in class. And sometimes at public school, it's like if they were still in their charter school, they'd have to be either, because of COVID, in their Zoom class, or in a regular year, they'd have to be in class and learning according to the schedule. Well, the schedule didn't work for them that day. It would not have worked for them today. And so this is one place where you can really maximize the effectiveness of homeschooling, because you could be more flexible and reactive to your needs and to your kids' needs. So
Exactly.
just take that into account, because
Yeah.
that's a big deal.
And a lot of times you'll hear the comment, and I know we're short on time, but you'll hear the comment like, well, if kids don't learn this now, then they never will. I've never had that happen. I've always had kids that had early morning jobs or different things like that. I never woke them up. When my son started his whole missionary thing, I didn't go wake him up at 6:30. I mean,
Okay,
they do
come
learn
on.
those skills
No,
eventually.
no.
Yeah.
I disagree with this one, because I've never learned how to wake up early. So, but no, you're probably right. I'll just have to take your word for it.
But yeah, let's be able to use this time to this advantage that's best for our kids, for sure. So yeah, just thanks for joining us. Do we have any questions? Did anybody join on Facebook Live?
I haven't been able to check all the comment sections, but no, I think you covered it thoroughly.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So be sure to join us again next week. We're going to talk about a really important topic about how to manage those multiple students. I had 2 babies while I was doing this. In fact, I started homeschooling my son 2 months before I delivered my 3rd baby. So I have a little bit of experience in this, and we're going to talk about, how to set up those individual goals, because that's going to be part of it. This is going to kind of push that whole self-directed, driven education, because we have little ones underfoot as well. So we're going to talk about every one of those things. So.
Wow. Yeah, that's a tough task. But the one thing that I found, and I know that we want to get out of here, but like the one thing I found is you can use the older kids to kind of coach the younger kids,
definitely.
and I've already seen that pay dividends, because number one, it helps the older kids cement the learning, and then it obviously gets the younger kids taught, and then there's a bond there. There's a bond there. That's magical at times.
Yeah, those siblings, you would not believe how important, and we're going to talk a lot about that next year. That multi-age learning is super important. It's the way we did it decades ago, before we began the whole mandated forced learning for schooling. And so we will talk about that a lot, of how mentoring is super, it's just so critical in good education.
Yeah. So. Okay.
All right.
Awesome.
Well, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. And we'll see everybody next week here. Again, Facebook Live. What's the URL for people who want to get to your resources, Rebecca?
Oh, it is the luminous.mind.net, and I have a special blog that I set up. I actually try to keep it at the top of the page. And I've been putting all the recordings there. I need to put 3, and then this one on there is next. And then I also always have the link there as well, so that you can join the next session if you would like to. So.
Okay. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.